The Young and the Restless spoilers. It happened in a moment so charged, so reckless, that even Genoa City, accustomed to scandals, betrayals, and stolen passions, seemed to stop breathing for a heartbeat. Claire and Kyle, tangled in a storm of emotion neither of them fully understood, found themselves swept into a kiss that burned far hotter than either intended, a kiss that ignited like a match dropped into dry tinder. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tender. It wasn't even romantic. It was a mess of longing, confusion, weakness, and the emotional desperation that had been building ever since Claire began weaving her way into the fragile spaces of Kyle's life. And yet the moment their lips met, everything that should have grounded them, reason, caution, loyalty, disintegrated under the force of the moment. It was reckless and intoxicating, a collision of two people standing far too close to the edge and pretending they didn't see the drop underneath. But what neither of them realized was that they were not alone. Harrison, standing small but perceptive at the doorway, witnessed everything, every desperate breath, every tremble, every unspoken truth. The little boy's eyes widened in horror as he saw his father, his hero, fall into a mistake that would tear open wounds far bigger than either adult understood. The sound that followed was not a whisper, nor a cry, but a sharp, panicked scream from Harrison's tiny lungs, a sound so raw it cut straight through the haze of passion and snapped Kyle back into reality. "Stop," he shouted, his voice cracking, trembling, the kind of desperate plea only a child could make when the world he trusts begins to tilt violently out of place. And in that instant, the kiss died. Kyle jolted backward as if burned, his breath uneven, his eyes wide with the horror of a man who realizes, too late, the line he has crossed. Claire, on the other hand, froze, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but out of the shock of being exposed at the exact moment she thought she was gaining control. Because behind her wide tear-filled eyes was a secret far darker than the kiss itself, a secret bound tightly with Holden, a secret crafted carefully and cruelly. The plan to convince Kyle that he was the father of her unborn child. A lie she intended to use as a weapon. A deception designed to pull him deeper into her orbit, deeper into the web Holden had spun around them both. Harrison, trembling but brave, stepped between them like a shield far too small for the weight it carried. His voice shook, but his determination did not. He told his father everything. Everything he had overheard, everything he had pieced together, everything Claire foolishly assumed a child wouldn't understand. And Claire felt the ground rip open beneath her as each word spilled into the air, sharp as broken glass. She tried to interrupt him, tried to paint herself as misunderstood, but Harrison's innocence made him fearless, and his fear made him honest. Every truth he revealed was another thread yanked from the tapestry of lies that Claire and Holden had been weaving for weeks. Kyle listened, his breath turning ragged, his jaw clenching as the reality of his own vulnerability dawned on him. He had let Claire into his home, into his heart, into the fragile spaces of his family, all while she carried a poisonous secret beneath her soft voice and tear-streaked eyes. And Claire, realizing her entire plan was shattering before her eyes, did what she always did when cornered, she cried. But these tears, unlike the ones she performed for Kyle, were raw, frantic, fueled by panic rather than manipulation. She sobbed and trembled, but beneath the fear was something darker, anger. Rage. Hatred for the child who dared to expose her. Harrison had ruined everything. He had pulled the mask off her face in one brutal sweep, revealing the monster beneath. And she couldn't understand how a child, just a child, had managed to notice so much, to overhear the quietest whispers, to recognize the lies embedded in her smiles. It made her furious. Furious at him. Furious at Kyle. Furious at Holden. Furious at herself for failing to maintain control. Kyle struggled to steady himself, but the betrayal crackled through him like electricity. He demanded the truth, his voice sharp and choked with the fury of a man who suddenly realized he had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. And when Claire hesitated, when she looked away, when her tears suddenly seemed calculated rather than sincere, something inside him snapped. Harrison repeated the final, damning detail. That Claire had planned to claim Kyle was the father of her baby, that she and Holden had whispered about it, that they believed Kyle was vulnerable and desperate enough to fall for whatever story Claire fed him. Kyle's heart pounded so violently it felt like it might burst through his chest. All the trust, all the sympathy, all the affection he had slowly allowed himself to feel for Claire twisted into a burning knot of anger and humiliation. And then it happened? A moment so fast and so explosive that neither Claire nor Harrison could fully process it until after the shock set in. Kyle, consumed by a rage he had never expected to feel toward someone he had once tried to protect, lifted his hand and struck Claire across the face. The sound cracked through the room like lightning. Claire stumbled backward, eyes wide, her cheek flaming red, a gasp tearing from her throat. Harrison froze, his small body trembling, his eyes filling with tears he didn't know how to contain. It wasn't just the violence that terrified him, it was seeing his father become someone unrecognizable, someone pushed so far by betrayal that the darkness inside him spilled out before he could stop it. Claire's tears fell harder now, not because she felt guilt for what she had done, but because she felt humiliation. Rage. Hatred. Her plan was supposed to have worked. Kyle was supposed to have crumbled into her arms, desperate for connection, eager to believe her lies. Holden had assured her that Kyle was vulnerable enough, emotional enough, lonely enough to fall exactly where they wanted him. And yet the entire plan came undone because of a child she underestimated, a child she resented now with a venom she could barely hide. Her voice shook with hysteria as she tried to speak, but Kyle cut her off with a look so cold, so furious, she felt it freeze the breath inside her chest. He didn't need more explanations. He didn't need more lies. He needed distance from her, from the deception, from the nightmare she had dragged into his life. Harrison clung to him, tears streaming down his face, begging his father not to fall apart again, begging him not to let Claire hurt them anymore. The little boy's voice cracked with fear and heartbreak, and Kyle felt the weight of his son's trust press against his chest like a stone. He wrapped his arms around Harrison, pulling him close, promising silently, desperately, that he would protect him from now on. That he would never let a woman like Claire slither into their lives again. But inside, Kyle was breaking. Breaking from humiliation. Breaking from betrayal. Breaking from the horrifying realization that Holden and Claire had played him like a fool, manipulating the raw, tender parts of him that he had tried so hard to keep buried. Claire, shaking, clutching her stinging cheek, stared at the two of them with something twisted in her gaze, a mixture of fear, hatred, envy, and a sharp, almost feral determination. She wasn't finished. She refused to be. If anything, being exposed only fueled her desperation. She wouldn't let Kyle walk away. She wouldn't let Harrison ruin her. She wouldn't let Holden abandon her plan. She wiped her tears, her breath shaky, but her mind spinning rapidly toward the next step, the next deception, the next angle of attack. Because in the ruins of that moment, beneath the kiss, the scream, the slap, the unraveling of lies, Claire made a silent vow: this was not the end. It was only the beginning. What happened in the hours after Kyle struck Claire would mark a turning point so dark that even the long history of betrayals in Genoa City paled in comparison. The sting on her cheek was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in her chest, nothing compared to the venom she felt twisting inside her as she realized she had lost control. That moment, Kyle choosing Harrison over her, Kyle recoiling from her lies, Kyle seeing through the carefully constructed illusion she had woven, ignited something feral inside Claire. She wasn't just hurt. She wasn't just afraid. She was enraged, pulled apart by a humiliation so sharp it sliced straight into her fractured psyche. In that fracture, something monstrous took shape. And Harrison, the small, keen-eyed child who had torn her entire plan apart, became the symbol of that humiliation. It happened quietly at first, in the way Claire's breathing steadied, in the way her tears stopped falling, in the eerie stillness that replaced her panicked trembling. She backed away from Kyle and Harrison, not because she had been defeated, but because she finally understood what must be done. She watched the father and son cling to each other, watched the bond she could never penetrate, watched the life she could never be part of, and a twisted resolve settled into her bones. Harrison had taken something from her. Harrison had exposed her. Harrison had ruined everything. And in Claire's warped, unraveling mind, the only way to restore her power was to take something of equal value from Kyle. Something he loved more than his own life. Harrison. She left that night without another word, without another tear, without another attempt to explain herself. But behind that silence was a storm gathering force, building momentum, shaping itself into a plan far more dangerous than any lie she had crafted before. She returned to Holden, her breath still shaky but her purpose sharpened into something lethal. Holden, accustomed to her fragility, was taken aback by the eerie composure she carried with her, an icy stillness that made even him uncomfortable. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply explained what had happened, her voice calm in a way that made his skin tighten. And when she told him what she intended to do, Holden should have said no. He should have walked away, should have recognized the level of madness she had slipped into. But Holden, blinded by his own obsession with her, his own twisted devotion, listened in silence instead. He didn't agree, not explicitly. But he didn't stop her either. And that silence, that cowardly, enabling silence, was all the permission she needed. Meanwhile, Kyle spent the night holding Harrison close, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, trying to steady the panic that clawed at him. He felt guilt, shame, anger, all tangled together in knots so tight they suffocated him. Harrison fell asleep against his chest, exhausted from crying, but even in sleep the child flinched as though afraid Claire might return. Kyle watched over him the entire night, refusing to close his eyes, terrified that if he looked away even for a moment, the chaos Claire brought into their lives would seep back in through the cracks. He didn't know yet that it already had. The next morning, the house felt eerie. Too quiet. Too cold. Kyle took Harrison to the kitchen, trying to pretend things were normal, trying to create a bubble of safety. But Harrison remained unsettled, glancing toward the windows, toward the hallway, toward the door, as if sensing something Kyle could not yet see. Children often feel danger before adults do, and Harrison felt it tightening around them like a rope. Claire watched from across the street. She watched the house. She watched Kyle leave for a brief moment to take a phone call outside. And she watched Harrison, small and alone, stepping into the living room with his backpack dragging behind him. The moment she saw him standing there, vulnerability wrapped around him like a shadow, something snapped inside her. She moved with a quiet, predatory precision she didn't know she possessed. Claire had once been timid, hesitant, someone molded by fear and manipulation. But humiliation had reshaped her into something else entirely. She approached the back door of the Abbott home with the confidence of someone who believed she had nothing left to lose and everything to regain through violence. The door, still broken from one of Jack's unfinished repair projects, didn't lock properly. Claire slipped inside as if she belonged there. Harrison turned, sensing movement, but before he could speak, before he could scream, before he could run, Claire's hand clamped over his mouth. His small body stiffened with terror as she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with rage, "You should have stayed out of it." Harrison struggled, kicking, tears filling his eyes as panic surged through him. But Claire had already prepared everything, a blanket to muffle him, a sedative she had stolen from an old medical kit Holden kept, a place to hide him where no one would think to look. She held him tighter as he thrashed, her breath unsteady, her eyes burning with a hatred that made her unrecognizable even to herself. She told him to stop fighting. She told him it was his fault. She told him Kyle would understand once he felt the pain she felt. Harrison's sobs were muffled against her hand, his small fingers clawing desperately at her wrist, but the sedative worked quickly. His body went limp, heavy, helpless, his eyes fluttering as consciousness slipped away. Kyle returned inside moments too late. At first, he didn't notice anything was wrong. It was just a quiet house. Just another morning. But then the silence became unbearable, the kind of silence that coils itself around the mind and whispers that something is missing. Harrison? Kyle called, his voice light, casual, until the second time, when the silence answered him back. Panic surged through him like lightning. He searched every room, shouting louder with each passing second. The living room. The hallway. The bathroom. The backyard. He called out again, his voice cracking as terror flooded his veins. Harrison was gone. And in the place where his backpack had been, there was only a single, chilling message written in a handwriting that made Kyle's stomach drop. You took everything from me. Now I take everything from you. Claire had taken him. When the realization hit, Kyle collapsed onto the floor, gripping the note so tightly it tore between his fingers. His heart pounded violently, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps that felt like drowning. Panic surged through him, burning, choking, clawing at his ribs. He dialed Jack. He dialed Summer. He dialed anyone who could hear the terror in his voice and understand that this wasn't just a kidnapping. This was vengeance. Claire carried Harrison into a car hidden 2 streets away, her hands trembling, her breath shallow but determined. She strapped him in gently, too gently, as if trying to reassure herself that she was still human. His small head rested against the seat, unconscious, peaceful in a way that twisted her emotions into something even more unstable. She touched his hair, her fingers shaking, and whispered, "This is your father's fault. Not yours, not yours." But even she didn't believe it. Holden waited at an abandoned property outside town, watching her pull up with a terror he tried to hide. He hadn't wanted it to go this far. He never wanted a child involved. But Claire, fragile, broken, desperate Claire, had become the one steering the storm. And he, foolish, cowardly, and infatuated, had let her. When she carried Harrison inside, Holden's breath stuttered. "Claire," he whispered, this is too far." Claire turned to him with a smile so eerily calm it chilled him to the bone. "No," she said. "This is just the beginning."